Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to today's edition of Just Thinking. Our state representative, James Arena-DeRosa, is with me today, and we're going to talk about what's going on in the state legislature, what's going on around here. James, good morning. It's always good to see you.
Well, good morning, Mary. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me back on your show.
Sure. Well, it's kind of our quarterly update, so tell us what's been going on locally in the last quarter.
So it's been interesting, and I'm still getting to know the learning curve of the role of a state representative, and one of the most important things that I've been trying to do is just engage with the community. We had a series of roundtables. We had a meeting with veterans here in Holliston. I had a session up at the Senior Center where people could come and talk to me. We'll do that again. I think one of the things that I might have mentioned, the Senior Center did a survey a few years ago, and 40% of the people didn't know who to talk to if they had a challenge or an issue with government. And so I've encouraged anybody in Holliston, if they need help, please reach out to me. If it's a state issue, we're happy to try to help navigate it. If it's federal, we'll get them to the right person. And if it's something more appropriate for the town of Holliston, we'll make sure that they're connected here. So that's still a lot of what we do. A fair amount of the work that we do is trying to be responsive to individual requests and issues that are facing people, residents of the town, in addition to the ongoing legislation, which is, of course, a really important part of our work in setting state policy. And we've had some good things happening. We have the WSK opening up down at the new kitchen.
It's called Whisk?
Yeah,
WSK.
yeah,
Whisk.
it's Whisk, yeah.
Yeah, Whisk.
Down at the studios, which was wonderful, and of course we had a lovely day for the stroll, which was a fabulous turnout for the stroll done by the Holliston business community along with the Girl Scouts. So that was kind of a nice, good to see that back in action after years of COVID, and a really good turnout. We're still trying to all be supportive of our local businesses here in Holliston. So that was nice. So I'm always looking for ways to stay connected. If I could put it out there, if it's okay.
Sure.
We don't always know everything that's going on, and sometimes people assume I know something. So if there's anything that people in town think that I should be at or be aware of, they should feel free to call us and say, hey, you might want to come to this, or here's something we really think you should recognize, or this person's achieved this amazing thing, can you come by and do a citation? If time permitting, I'm always up for doing that and being supportive in any way that I can. So that's kind of a piece of that ongoing work of staying connected to the community, being helpful as I can, certainly talking to people here in town about issues that might pop up where there's a potential state intervention. And then we've had a few legislative things that happened that are positive that maybe I can mention, and then we'll talk a little bit about the closeout budget, and then I know you want to talk about housing. So we did pass, although it still has to go to conference, one of the issues in our society in general is that there's still this disparity between men and women. There's gender disparity on pay, even for the same work with roughly the same amount of years. Some of it's sort of legacy issues in the way we as a society have approached certain jobs, which I'll get to. But one thing that we did do is for any entity that's got more than 25 employees, they're going to have to disclose the salary parameters in their job listings, because the research is that's a big obstacle for some reason. And what's interesting for me, I supported it, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's good for everybody. I think as a candidate, I always wanted to know what the range was. I was always much happier to know what the ballpark range was. And likewise, as someone that hired hundreds of people as an employer, I get so frustrated sometimes when a decision was made by whomever that we weren't going to post salary ranges, and you'd get to the final stages and you'd find out somebody's $40,000 or $50,000 away from you. I'm like, well, we just wasted all that time on all these interviews.
It's ridiculous.
So it's a good thing. Hopefully, it will address some of the disparity, but in terms of just knowledge being out there. But I also think it's just good for men and women, and for all people, and for employers too. And a lot of them already do it, by the way, so it's not a huge change for some. So that's something that we're trying to work on. What I have said, though, I mean, here we are as I talked to the sponsors of the bill afterwards, and I thought of my mom on this one. We as a society, over time, have undervalued roles that in general, not all, but in general, women, at least up until current years, have tended to be interested in. So now we're facing this crisis around nursing and elder care and health care and home care. We don't pay them enough, and now that people have other opportunities, they're going to other free. We need to rethink that whole thing. And my mom was the director of the prison at Norfolk, and was basically head of all the medical for a while. but was paid less. Nothing against people who do sanitation, but the people who were in charge of the sanitation department were paid more than her. Now, I'd argue that they're at least as important as each other, but and I think that had a lot to do with sort of gender roles and gender issues. So and what I said to the sponsors is, we have a much larger issue to look at, and I think of this with my son, who he enjoys teaching autistic kids, but traditionally it's been more women that have gone into those roles, and a lot of those social service roles. I was in the nonprofit world, a lot of women, and just not paid as much. So I think we need to rethink a lot of that along the way. Within a fair and competitive environment that we have here in our economy. So that's something we did. Do you want to talk a little bit about the closeout budget and what's been going on with it?
Sure.
Yeah,
closed out, is it?
So I may be dashing into my car for a vote. Mary and I were talking this morning about should we still do the show, and I've been in touch and I'm like, look, if there's a quorum call, if there is a formal session, I will be there to vote. I think we're still trying to do it in an informal session where they don't need as many votes. But let me just step back and give a little background, because I'm sure people are hearing about this and might be curious. So to close out the current fiscal year budget as we look ahead, we got down to the wire on November 17th. It's about $3 billion, and we agreed on almost everything, including, by the way, a lot of state contracts for educators at our universities and nurses. And but the House and the Senate, both controlled by Democrats, I'm a Democrat, could not agree on how to deal with the migrant issue, which we'll talk about shortly.
The shelters.
Right, and shelters, exactly. So as the clock was ticking and winding down, here I am, new in the legislature, I was like, why don't we pull out all the things that we've agreed to and pass that so we can send that to the governor so these people can get paid. And these aren't contracts that we could discuss or debate and negotiate. They had been agreed to legally, right? So, and other things that were important that needed to be done, sped ed funding, which still is hurting some local towns, that extra supplement, all that stuff. I'm like, why don't we just do that? And then we'll keep arguing and debating the shelter migrant issue, but that's not how it ended up. It was decided to we'll go into informal. Now what's happened, so up to that point it was on the Democrats. Now we're in informal session. The House and Senate conferees have actually agreed on what to do, but during an informal session, one Republican could say, I don't like this. So it gets blocked and stopped, and that's what's been happening the last week and a half. So now we're trying to, if we get half in session, we can pass it. I just think at some point, let's just call everyone in, do the vote, and pass it. But I want to talk for a minute about the...
Can we back up just a
sure.
second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because a lot of people don't understand the difference between an informal session, which means I don't have to go, okay? Yeah. And if not enough people are there, or if there's nobody in the room, and somebody brings the legislation up, just one person can stop it. That's basically it.
That's correct. Anything that's done during informal session, if one person objects, it basically shuts it down.
So everything has to be unanimous, and we're not there yet on this bill.
No, that's right.
It may never be.
Right, and what the good part is that the House and Senate conferees did come to an agreement.
Right.
Right. But if had that happened on November 17th, then it would have passed because we would have voted it in.
Right.
Now one Republican can stop it. So
the other thing is that we did have the Globe that kind of gave the legislature a black eye this year for being the underperforming this year. A lot of time off, this, that, and the other thing, and the budget was supposed to be passed long ago. Yeah. So it's not like, from a public perception, it's not like that anybody looks good, because you all have the same responsibility no matter what side you're on. You just don't have the power. So at any rate, let's hope that they will resolve this, but it does just come down to now it's just politics.
Yeah, and I do think that in a governor's first year, you always give a little leeway. I am hopeful that we will pass the next budget by June 30th, as we're supposed to.
Yeah.
Traditionally, the first year of a governor's first term, they get an extra month to file, so then there's an extra month to do all the meetings. So that wasn't that far off, but it was later. As far as the pace of things, yeah, I'm still getting used to it. tend to like things to move a little more quickly. But
Yeah, well, that's.
but as I'm reminded, I'm fairly new at it, and just trying to, do the best I can with it. But I wish we were moving on things more quickly. I mean, it is a 2-year session. I'm hopeful we're going to make some progress in the second year of the session, as we've had a number of hearings. It is interesting that we have this system where there can almost be an unlimited amount of bills that are filed, and I'm not sure that's the best.
Right.
And it's almost done. Sometimes it's done as a courtesy for people, and so what you end up, there's 8,000 bills to follow, which is just crazy. And I almost wonder, should they say every rep, look, you've got a certain number of, you can, sure, you could do 15, 20, 25, even that would still limit it to,
4,000 or 5,000.
Exactly, or even 1,000. So anyway, but we'll, it is.
No,
what
it used to drive me crazy that we would get 8,000 to 10,000 bills, and then it takes ages for them to catalog them and do the journal and everything else and get them all in print.
Sign where they go.
And then divide them up and get the hearings going. And if you have, it's like cheapers. It's a waste of time because some of them are just bizarro.
Yeah. And I don't know what the full answer is, but I do think it's something we should consider looking at. And I also think in this electronic age, it's easier for stuff to get put in, and so I think those numbers have probably gone up as well. I want to touch on the migrant issue because I'm actually getting a fair number of calls on it, and it's interesting. And look, you know my background in social services. Do I care about people that are unhoused? Of course, but we don't have unlimited resources in this state. This is a national problem that we have to address collectively. And I think the feeling we're starting to get is that it can't just be Massachusetts. And so the big debate between the House and the Senate was that the Senate, we agreed on the amount of money this time, but the House wanted to put some conditions. We felt that we needed regular reporting. What's happening? How are we getting out of this situation? What are we doing to get people out of transition? What are we doing to get the work permits, people working so they're contributing to society? What about overflow shelters if we've reached this cap that the governor wants to do? The Senate wanted to say, no, we're just going to give them more time. We'll give them essentially a blank check to keep doing it and trust their system. I think now we've come to a compromise, at least my understanding. But I have to say, and I hope this changes, I'm on emergency planning. It's one of the committees got appointed to, partly because I'd done emergency relief and work with refugees and migrants, both at Oxfam and at Peace Corps and also at USDA. And I've been to some briefings that the governor's office has done, and not a lot of depth on the answers so far. Let me just be frank about that. And I've been in touch with our chair, and I'm like, at what point do we have oversight hearings? How much money are we spending putting people in hotels? How much food's being wasted? Those aren't good things. Do I want to be helpful? Of course. But I don't want us to waste money. That's that pragmatic side of James that always just, it's balancing that desire to be helpful, but also, limited resources. It's a much bigger issue for the federal government to deal with. I mean, we've got to get our arms around it as a country, and I think it's a combination. It's a combination of thoughtful border control. I don't think it's unreasonable. I mean, we need a good process. I don't want kids in cages or families being separated. It's not that awful stuff that happened. That's terrible. But we need a good process, and we've got to figure out this work permit system where, especially from some of the countries where people are coming, they're actually highly skilled, could fill jobs. We're hundreds of thousands of jobs behind, and we have an aging workforce. It's like a ticking time bomb for us as a society. It's not all of the answer, but it's part of the answer, getting those people into jobs so they're paying taxes, contributing. And how many of us, many of us came to this country at some point, and that was our history, but getting someone a job and getting them to contribute is an important part of the process. So it's going to be interesting. I'm supportive of it this time around. If it comes up again next year, it's going to be interesting to see how those debates go, because people want to see what's the end. Where's the end to this? How do we move ahead as a state, but as a country? So I'm sure we'll hear a lot about it during the presidential campaign anyway. But we'll see. Anyway, so
let's go back to when DeSantis sent us all the folks down to Martha's Vineyard. A cruel thing to do to a bunch of people, and yet. And I think he did it just as a political move.
Oh, of course.
Okay, so nothing to his credit, because I don't give him any. But there has to be a level of frustration, because they are right there. They are the first port of departure or call or whatever. And you can't blame them for the frustration. what you can blame is that this has been like 25 years.
That's right.
We're not talking
That's right.
yesterday.
No, we need a
you know,
better
they're all new
process.
people. They're different people. It's different administrations. It's different parties.
Fortunately, for me, because just by happenstance, I don't have a hotel in my district. I'm hearing secondhand. Some reps are getting calls at midnight. People are getting dropped off in the morning, and then when they ask, well, are there resources? Is there money? Well, we don't really know. We're just going to drop them off. That's not a good answer. You know, so the way the state's been dealing it, there's got to be a better way. And this is where I think we're giving a little more time, but I think that we're going to see oversight hearings at some point if we don't get some progress on it. But it's been an ongoing problem, and it's got to be. It's more national, but we've got some choices to make as a state on how we approach it. So
You know, though, you have a unique perspective. I remember, because you've been in the bureaucracy, and you know how the inside of government works, which is, in my estimation, and even though most people debate with me, politics is over here. That's what happens under the Golden Dome too much of the time. But when you get into the bureaucracy, really, for the most part, the politics drifts away because there are so many rules and regulations and so forth that it seldom, collides. But you know what it takes to be able to be accountable for what happens on the ground.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody else is up here. It sounds like a great idea. Oh, just give them the money, they'll figure it out. But you know what it's like
How
to
does
have
it
your
really
reports.
play out?
Yeah, and that's where it matters.
I mean, one of the things we've heard sort of say a lot of food's being wasted. And I said, well, is somebody asking what kind of food people eat, where they're from, to the extent that we can connect to appropriate food and restaurant, let's do that and save money at the same time. If we can't, fine, we'll still make sure they get what they need. Simple questions that probably aren't being asked or haven't been asked yet.
Well, you do have a new administration in the government too, so it is a compound of things.
It is, and they're getting settled, and they're doing the best they can, and so hopefully we'll get our arms around it. But to be determined. And then, I know you wanted to talk about housing a little bit, and that bumps up against some pragmatic things, but we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay, so I wanted to hit, excuse me, in terms of the budget and all of the processes that you go through. One thing I would like the community to understand is after there are bills and we go through the hearing process, let's explain that the hearing process, you get this budget, whatever the documents are, you go through this hearing project, and you folks don't agree. You talk about a conference committee, and that's where a lot of the time, a lot of the decisions are actually made.
Oh, sure.
What's a conference committee?
So a conference is a committee made up of members of the House and the Senate. So when you're saying there's not agreement, the House can pass a bill, and then the Senate can pass a bill,
yes,
which is to do the same things, but they eventually have to pass a joint bill that says exactly the same thing, and that's where the disagreement comes. That's where the disagreement came on this last bill that we're trying to get through on how to address the shelter and migrant issue. And it's a very small number of people that are in those meetings.
Tell them how many people.
Yeah, it's like a handful.
6.
And it's usually people that have been around for a while and have accumulated stature, and they know the system. And to their credit, they've put the time and energy in. It's not that they're not, so there's some rationale for it. There's a lot of responsibility put on them to come to some kind of agreement. There's a little bit of back and forth between the conferees and the members on, amendments, ideas, and things. But then ultimately, what ends up happening, this is where I actually thought you were going. A lot of the things that we end up voting for and passing are part of like a $50 billion, it's a huge bill. And so, yes, certain things get passed, and along the way you might try to say, well, I don't like this. The one thing that it's interesting that there aren't as many debates on specific parts of a bill as I thought there would be. That, and I guess when things are controversial, it does get thrown to the floor and there's debate and discussion. A lot of stuff gets hashed out ahead of time. So ultimately, you're voting up and down on whether you want to keep the state going. And of course, I want to be supportive of some important things that we have to do. But that's kind of an interesting dynamic, too.
There's not as much debate these days.
There's not. It just, if it happens, but it happens away from the chamber. And some of that just might be there's so much that has to get done. It has to be done in pieces and parts aside. But it's,
maybe.
Yeah, no,
Call
I
me
know.
a skeptic.
Yeah, we'll keep circling back on that one as I'm there longer. But
yeah.
I'm always one for, I want to hear other people's voice. And The chairs that are chairs of my committee are wonderful. They're very, every time I have a question or if I want to talk to them about something, they're very open. We've sat down. What about this? And that's great. But what I don't get to do, other than in the hearing when there's questions, is to hear what everyone else is thinking. I'm a big believer in collective action, and it's just not structured that way. I was just surprised there aren't just, we're going to meet as a committee to see where are we on all this stuff. It doesn't really happen that way. If I want to ask a question or say, I think we should do this, yes, they're great. But I want to hear what you're saying, what you're saying, what you're saying. You know, it's just different, and I don't, you know, and maybe this is legislative versus executive. When I was an executive, I always wanted to trust
you almost had to
the team around me and sort of glean from their expertise the best way to go forward. But I've always been one to think that you can get better results by having good people around the table. But we'll see. It's a mix of that. They would probably argue that happens, but that happens more informally, and that's fine. So. But anyway, so we'll see. Yeah.
We won't debate it.
No, I know. We'll keep talking about it in my future meetings. Yes.
Yeah, it's the right thing to do, and there are lots of reasons why it's hard to do.
No, exactly. I just think there would be value in,
there is value,
and I do some of it on my own, and that's kind of where I'm at.
I think that's probably the long term. Yeah. So the things about housing, there is one piece that has happened that the Board of Assessors has tackled recently. There's a tax relief bill that passed. So this is said and done, and this was Governor Healy's tax relief bill. And in it, there is a provision that says local communities, if they choose, so it's an enabling statute, if this community chooses, then people who rent apartments out, so landlords, can, if they are willing to rent to low-income people, low and moderate income people who come with whatever guidelines within the guidelines that they're required to, they can get a town tax abatement. So I don't own anything, but I own a house. I have a rental apartment that's been there for years. It's a legal apartment. Instead of just doing it to anybody, I do it to the low and moderate income, which means what I can charge for that apartment is less, okay? To compensate me, I'm basically given a tax write-off because there's a public purpose to doing this. So the assessors have just started talking about this. One of the things it raises is the question of accessory apartments. Holliston doesn't. We have them.
I was going to mention that because I think that's part of what's coming in whether it's through bond bill or because there's different policy permutations or as just standalone housing issues.
She wants to mandate it.
I think
she wants to mandate it. It will cause a lot of discussion. I mean, I just within the last 8 years, there was a committee in Holliston where we were trying to get market rate affordable. So in other words, you know what that means, like a house that's $250,000 you can call affordable. It doesn't mean it has any restriction on the deed that keeps it affordable. But you know, if you know what the price affordable means in the market, it's not the same thing as what it means in government. In government, affordable means it has a deed in perpetuity that you know you're going to be stuck with, sort of, and people worry about that. But at any rate, we talked to other officials about changing the accessory apartment to allow it so that it wouldn't just be to family members. Once your family member is done using it, whatever, you'd be able to rent it to somebody else. So it's passed all permits for septic systems and everything else like that. It's all perfectly legal. But it doesn't have to just be to someone in the family, which is the way it is now.
Interesting.
And we ran into a stone wall, you know? So I think it's going to be, if that's in there, and I know it is, I mean, I know it's in the bill, but if it's in there, that's going to be, locally, I'm not sure, I don't know how Holliston will feel.
I think there'll be a lot of discussion, and I think maybe there'll be discussions about the difference between creating an accessory dwelling unit within the current confines of the structure versus literally adding on, because there's different ADUs, right? Some ADUs are actually adding a piece to the footprint. Some are just within the current structure. I think we might get more support for that approach versus just this wide open you can actually build. But we're going to have to look to deal with the housing crisis. We're going to have to look at a huge variety of approaches, and I think ADUs is going to have to be part of it. How that looks like, and I actually would be interested in talking with local housing housing folks about, and assessors about, just, is there a way to do it that makes sense for towns that would help increase the market without making it too onerous? Maybe it's the limited number. I don't know. I mean, there's all different kind of approaches that could be considered. But I think it will be part of it. I mean, one of the things that even with our public housing stock, I had a chance to meet with Haley Fetro. She's the ED. She's executive director of the Housing Authority in Hopkinton. That's one, but she also is on our Housing Authority here in Holliston, as you know. And I wanted to have a better understanding of this. You might have seen the Globe a few weeks ago. So many public housing units that are sitting open, and it's really
with vacancies.
With vacancies, yeah, really frustrating. And there's a couple different things that are going on. And one of them will be addressed by the bond bill, because it's a $4 billion bond bill.
Yeah.
And there's over $1.6 billion for repair and upgrading. The units that most local public authorities have, they don't get enough rehab money every year. So maybe they have 5 vacant units that are going to turn over that need to be upgraded or fixed or whatever it is, but they've only got money to fix 1 or 2. Yeah. And so it just kind of feeds on itself and multiplies, and that's a factor on why so many units are sitting vacant. If this goes through, that would and gets funded, and we'll talk about that too. But if this goes through, that would help with that, which is important, because yeah, we want to build new stock. And there's a huge amount of money in the bond bill to actually put money into another 40,000 new units for the state. Right. But we also have to take care of the units that we have, because if they're staying vacant, that's not good either. That's another. We hear of all this dire need for housing, and yet here we have thousands of public units that are open. But the other driving factor, and I have a meeting with Secretary Augustus next week, and I have my little list that I've been working on. I've known him for years, good guy, and I'm sure he's hearing this from a lot of people. The way the public housing was established in Massachusetts some years ago, we made a decision, and look, and I'll be very clear, I think public housing in Massachusetts should be available to everyone who qualifies. Let's start with that as a premise. I think that's important. But it was almost too wide open. You can check off, I'll go anywhere, without any kind of review or prioritizing or work on the part of the applicant. For example, if you put on that thing, I'll go anywhere, you can get called by 10 or 15 or 20 different places, and then you're slowly working through whether or not you want to be there. I think we should do it the other way. Why don't we, and it's still, because people are going to fight me a little and say, well, you're taking away choice. I'm not taking away choice. What I'm saying is that like every other person, when they're thinking about where they're going to live, they're going to do a little research on where they want to live. I want to be near my relatives. I want to be close to public transportation. I want to be near my local grocery stores that I go. I mean, these are we had small children, so we also were looking at good schools, and some people that might not be a factor. But those are all things that people look at when they think about where they want to live, right? So let them do that first, and then come up with a list, 10, 15, whatever it is. It'll make the system so much more efficient. And I just think that Millis, I was talking with them. I met with their housing authority, and they had 100 applications that got sent out for empty units in their community. They got 6 back. So, because, there's no train. Or, Millis, that's like 2 hours from where I live. Nothing again. I'm sure people in, I say people in Pittsfield and Lowell, like, I'm not going to Pittsfield, I'm not going to Lowell, nothing against those communities. They say the same things about us. And look, for people who want to live anywhere, that's great, wonderful. We could still have a system that accommodates that. Why aren't we giving some, not full like it used to be, some local preference to local housing authorities for people who otherwise qualify economically, or vets or whatever, people who have lived in the town, contributed to the town, pay taxes to the town. And I just think we built a system that doesn't take into account human nature, and people want to be close. People want to be close to their social networks. I mean, I think I told you that. Maybe I didn't. That we had a hard enough time moving my Italian grandmother down the street. But at least we could say, look, your relatives are all less than a mile away. Procaccini's grocery store is across the street. The train is a little walk. and she loved it. It was great for her. I'm not sure she would have gone to Lowell or Pittsfield. She would have said, I'm not moving. So
yeah, it's hard to reestablish yourself at that
exactly.
stage.
But that's what the system right now,
It's very unfair. It's very unkind.
Yeah, and it's so wide open, and it doesn't work. And again, for those people who will say, hey, look, I'll live anywhere because I'll be happy to have a place. That's wonderful.
Fine.
That's great. So it's just, and so meanwhile, you've got towns where you've got people living in communities that are otherwise eligible that
Can't access.
They can't be placed into them. I just think we got to be smarter than that as Massachusetts, and so that's part of my conversation with Ed as well. But we have a huge housing issue. I mean, the people.
Oh, Holliston's housing issue is horrific. I just finished writing, or recently finished writing, the section on the housing and for Holliston. And after we did public housing, the only time we did public housing really was the stuff at Cole Court, and that was back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And then we had 2 other facilities done, the one behind Town Hall and Mission Springs. Those were pretty much driven by a nonprofit group. It wasn't that it was the state agencies, it wasn't a state program. So those, that's it. We have real severe limits.
Somewhat limited.
And because there's been no public money available for housing.
That's right.
How do you do it? You go to a contractor and you say, could you do this? And they can't even afford it. It's not possible to buy the land and do the building for the kind of money that we would be able to pay.
We've got to make it more cost effective and lucrative for developers to be able to build more units rather than just say, look, I've got 50 acres. By right, I can put 51 acre. I'm just going to do that because I'll make my money.
You'll
and not
make
have
a
the
lot
hassle.
more money.
And so everyone's got to work together on this. How do we provide more housing? And maybe instead of using all 50 acres, we're only using 10, and we're leaving 40 open. I like cluster housing if it can work. The other thing that's going on with the lack of housing, I mean, think of seniors, not all, people want to, I love my house on Mechanic Street. I probably won't leave, but that's okay. But a lot of people maybe want to downsize to a small house. You used to be able to downsize a little bit, park $100,000, live comfortably, and then that would open up a starter house for somebody. But now the numbers are such that they can't do that. I've talked to seniors who are like, my best option is to just stay put.
Yep.
And so that kind of puts a bind on the system. And then young people, I still worry about, people talk about the character of the town whenever we talk about building, and that's an important consideration. What do we want this town to look like? But the character of the town is also who lives here and what they do. And if 99% of the people in Massachusetts can't afford Holliston, that's going to affect the quality of the town and the people who teach us and protect us and fire and DPW. All those people, some of them should. I like that some of them lived in town. A lot of them did when I was first here, and coaching and involved.
Used to be everybody did.
And when I was growing up in Walpole, almost everyone. I mean, my mother babysat the fire police department. And now it's all, and obviously things have changed a little bit, but it's really hard when people that want to work here have to commute an hour.
Yeah.
So
no, it's
I know some towns are looking at are there ways to incentivize that group and maybe give some kind of a break, and that'll be an interesting thing to look at some point. But
it's going to be a lot of little things.
It's
not going to be one big thing. There's no magic bullet.
Absolutely.
And it's going to take a lot of work. And I'm hoping during the 300th anniversary next year to bring some of these issues out as a part of the history book, because the history, I try to spell out exactly what took place.
Yeah.
So is that where we mean to go when we look ahead?
Right.
Because are we sustainable? That's the big question. And sitting where the assessors, as an assessor, the answer is no.
It's a huge challenge.
We are not sustainable. And the reason we are not is that we have just about run out of land, period.
Yeah.
Okay, done. Gone.
We should, when we have this regional housing meeting with your assessor's hat, I'd love you to be part of that, because I think that would be of value.
Well, I was going to say, I've asked, the assessors have asked for the housing, Brian Clancy, who is the head of the housing trust here.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And to come to a meeting next month, because we really do need to start talking about the accessory apartment. That's what he's promoting.
Okay.
And so we need to start talking about that.
If it's public, I'm happy to sit in just to listen.
No, absolutely. We'll let you know when it is.
Please do.
But housing is going to be a pivotal issue, because
right about that.
The reason Holliston survived was because it had so much vacant land that was cheap, so a lot of builders came here and built houses.
Right.
And that's how we survived.
And added to the
okay,
tax
and just
base,
kept adding
sure.
and adding
No,
and adding
a lot
and
of
adding.
towns around here, the same thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
but now we've bumped up against, Hopkinton's still got more land.
little bit
we
more
don't,
land, but
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
We're out of it. We're out of it.
Yeah.
And we have set aside 30% of it in open space. Well, that has to be monetized some way because that's off the tax rolls.
Yeah.
You know, it's not industry, it's not commercial, it's not anything. It's, you know, 130.
Interesting.
So it's been set aside. It's in perpetuity. It's done.
Yeah.
Now we got to figure out what are we doing with the remaining 70%. How are we all going to live and fit in this area? And we have to allow for growth. If you don't grow, you die.
No, it's
So-
balancing. I want to add one more thing on the
Yep.
bond bill, if I can, before
Yep.
we close.
Yep, we gotta close. Yep.
This is part of James's learning process. Right now, the state has about $50 billion in bonding money that's out there, but we've only funded $3 billion of it. So
Isn't that a great
oh, that
scheme?
drives me crazy.
Oh, yeah,
So I'm supporting the governor's bond bill, and I will vote for it, and we'll talk about policy issues along the way. But I almost wish, like, let's do something that we can fully fund, rather than it's almost these pretend numbers. One towns, they got some money into a bond bill. It was before my time, and they're like, how do we get the money? And then, of course, we have meetings with A&F, and they're like, well, you have to get on the list because we have $50 billion that the House that legislature has authorized, but only $3 billion has actually been appropriated. So it's like, oh my goodness. So
But it's even worse than
Yeah,
that. Okay, maybe you already know this from being inside, but this was my discovery inside state government. You guys need to appropriate it, but the trigger to using bond money only comes from the governor. Only he or she can decide when they're going to float the bonds to release any kind of amount of money that they would then be able to have you appropriate. Okay, and sometimes that doesn't happen.
on top of it, okay.
On top of it, you have a layer, which is the governor's total control over how many bonds are being floated. Now, he or she might want something over here, not over here. So it can be floated, but it might not go to the department that you want it to be. Okay, it might not be the housing, it might not be the public safety, it might be schools. You know, you never know. It's a crapshoot for some of that stuff.
Yeah, it's not it's not one of my favorite learning processes so far.
Really?
I'd rather we just be less disingenuous and say, look, this is how much money we have. This is what's most important. This is what we're going to fund and bond so that people can move ahead and make these investments. It's just, yeah.
It's also why the bond rating is so important for us, though. When our bond rating slips, you know, then our interest payments are higher. You can get less out of the bond, so she or he is going to float less.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, anybody can look at things. You know, approved 50. We're only spending 3. So that's 40.
But it looked good that day.
Well, no,
didn't it?
exactly.
You looked good.
So that's $47 billion of communities out there thinking they have all this money coming. Well, maybe not. So anyway,
well, the legislature looked good that day, and the governor looked good that
I'm very careful when
day.
we talk about these things to say, you know, is this real money? And,
No.
and sometimes it is.
Yeah.
But often it's not. But
Often it's stuck in a bond bill. That's a great game. But at any rate, all right. It's always fun to talk to you.
no, absolutely. This is great. I'm enjoying these quarterly sessions with you, and I'll look forward to the next one.
All right. Now keep you posted on when the assessors are going to talk about housing, and keep me posted on when your housing regional thing is.
That would be great, and if we could post my email, that would be great. I know they did
please
that
do.
last
Yeah,
time.
let's make sure that we do that.
James.Arena-DeRosa at masshouse.gov, mahouse.gov, and we'll leave that. And then also my phone number. We'll leave that, and they can overlay it at the end of the show.
That would be great. Okay, I think we're set. We'll talk to you in 3 months.
Thank you so much,
All right,
Mary.
get to work. Okay, we'll see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.